Alright guys, William here back with a new video, and in this video we're back talking about Sasuke once again, where in a now yearly tradition, typically as the first video of the year, I'll be doing my review of the latest Sasuke tournament, Sasuke 42. A tournament that I thought was pretty good by the end. I mean, I think it was one that was kind of lagging at the beginning, I'll be honest. I do think stage 1 was largely lackluster, and I did very much worry this was just going to be a mediocre tournament, but I do really feel like stages 2 and 3 really brought a lot of life to this tournament and provided some moments that I think will end up being memorable for down the road, in a spot where stage 1 was largely not that memorable, linked to this tournament being a bit of a tale of two halves. But either way, again, I'll still be running through the entire tournament, talking about my opinions along the way. So with that, let's not talk about stage 1 just yet, because I do actually want to briefly mention the Sasuke World Cup that ended up happening earlier this year, which I sadly did not get around to doing a video on. I did initially plan to when it was announced, however, I ended up being busy at the time that ended up airing, and again, just did not find time to ultimately make a video on it. But again, I just want to mention the fact that, again, I watched it. It was good. I had fun with it. I thought stage 1 in particular had a lot of really shocking fails. Stage 3, again, was a bit more underwhelming, considering just how many people failed the cliffhanger. But overall, I felt like it was a very solid initial tournament that, again, I would like to see back down the road. I don't know if I necessarily need it like every single year, but again, it is a special that provides some pretty fun exhibition runs. That was well worth the watch. But with that, again, now let's actually talk about stage 1, where we got one new obstacle in stage 1 finally. Again, we finally got rid of the silk slider. And again, when I heard that we were getting rid of the silk slider, I was like, they're just going to bring back the wing slider, which they brought back for World Cups. Again, that would make sense, but no, they actually created a new obstacle here. One that was probably easier, but probably more fun to watch, and that is the screwdriver. Again, I thought this obstacle was actually really interesting visually. It's one where you hit a button, which causes pillar to start moving, and you have to run along an angle and jump to the pillar before it gets too far away. Again, a really interesting obstacle that feels like this mix of like the flying pillar from Kunoichi, an obstacle I've always really loved, and it's something like the butterfly wall. Again, I think a really interesting concept, though it ends up not being particularly difficult. Like, it feels like the people that we did see here were, again, just a lot of the lesser like celebrities that kind of just like luck their way through the first obstacle. And while we got a lot of really cool like almost fails from some of the bigger competitors, again, no one particularly notable failed the obstacle, and I feel like for down the road it'll probably end up being an extremely easy one. But again, I like the obstacle from a more like conceptual standpoint, to where while I wish it was something that provided a bit more danger, and to be fair, there's ways you can modify it to do so, I did feel like it was a fun addition to this tournament, but one that didn't really shake up stage 1 enough to make it that riveting of a ride, where I did feel like by the end of this stage 1, I just felt like it just felt like we were just watching a lot of the repeated material from recent tournaments, as again, we're not getting many other modifications. But with that said, we got one other modification, a major one, in that the fishbone now has 4 extra pillars, each of which being attached to one of the middle pillars that did no damage. It was so pointless. And again, while I will mock this addition at least, I do feel like we got a similar modification later in the course that actually plays out in a better light. And I actually do like that Inui is trying to do these workarounds, in the fact that obviously he doesn't have the budget to create many brand new obstacles. So I do like the fact that he is, again, making these like very minor modifications to older obstacles to try to make things feel a little bit fresh. I just feel like, again, this specific change here is one that just felt so superfluous. But either way, we start off the stage with a comedy duo member guy that fails rolling hill, unsurprising. But then we finally get Torisawa, who does this typical shtick of lifting weights, and who would have guessed he also fails rolling hill, which I was actually disappointed to see. I did actually want to see him be the first to fail screwdriver, but he doesn't end up getting there. Then after that, we do get some runs from some women, which I was surprised to see so early on, but we get another like comedian person who spends like her entire run laughing but ends up failing rolling hill. We get Tom Nakano, a professional wrestler who ends up actually being the first to clear rolling hill in this tournament and proceed to be the first to test out screwdriver, and she ends up failing the obstacle in a very weird way, where it seemed like she just didn't understand how the obstacle worked, where she seemed to think that once you hit the button it would go around in a circle instead of just be this like one-time opportunity to go and grab it, to which she just ends up waiting too long and obviously makes the obstacle impossible for her, which again was kind of a lame way to see this obstacle start off. But then we get to competitor number 5, Haruka, a Cyber Japan dancer, meaning that there's no Karen on this season, which makes this season pointless. But obviously we get a lot of them dancing at the start line, and she also ends up making the screwdriver, ends up failing there, though has a more interesting fail this time, again grabbing onto it but losing her grip midway through. Now following that, we get some idols trials qualifiers, because I guess that's a thing we need to do on Sasuke now. But again, first one fails screwdriver, second one starts her run with a cut to the screwdriver, where again, it's so funny that even Inui at this point knows that rolling hill is just such a boring obstacle, which again, this editing trick here of just skipping straight to screwdriver ends up being a pretty common occurrence across across this stage, but she ends up being unshockingly the first person to clear it, only to then fail Fishbone. Then we got a pointless run from Bon Nakamura, who fails Rolling Hill, which is like, why do we show this person? But then we finally get to the first actual contender here in Yuta Yamashita, the Sasuke Circle guy. That last tournament made it all the way to stage 3, and he actually does get like a decent segment here about his like models of obstacles that he's built. He does weirdly compete in a lion cloth with the Sasuke logo on it, but I actually did genuinely think he was going to be the first person to clear, and I do think he was put in this spot with the intention of him being the first person to clear, where again, Inui likes to do that, separate all these people that can clear to kind of break up the pacing of the tournament, and he seems to have a really clean run, again, being the first to get to Twin Diamond, clear that, clears Dragon Glider, clears the Warp Wall, with a bevy of time on the clock, only to fail 4 attempts at it and ends up timing out there, which is again a very underwhelming end to his run here. In a spot where again, I did feel like he was someone that could have become this new top tier competitor for the show, and again with his fail here, I do feel like again someone that's a little bit up in the air at this point. Now following that again, we get a couple more celebrities end up failing Twin Diamond, with both of which again not being fast forwarded, but again they might as well have been, where the first one we just skipped straight to the Fishbone, the second one we skipped straight to Twin Diamond right before they failed, where again, it feels like that's another editing trick that I know he used on this tournament. I believe he used it last tournament as well. I feel like that was the tournament I realized that he started doing this, so just not really cutting many runs, but also just like cutting straight to when they end up failing in their runs. But anyway, we then get to another celebrity following this in Hiroki Kajita, someone that I don't believe I've seen before, so I was not expecting much from him, though he ends up actually being the first clear of the night, having a pretty clean run. Though we do get a commercial in the middle of it that has Yamada promoting Nissan, because we needed that. Anyway, we then get to Koji Saikawa, who's back after having missed Sasuke 41, and again, he ends up having a pretty clean run here as well, doing a flip off the Twin Diamond, and again, backflipping off the Warp Wall, and still clearing with 12 seconds on the clock. He demonstrated a lot of potential there. But then we get to a bit of a slower stretch of the tournament, with again, even more focus on these celebrities that don't end up doing particularly well. We get Wataru Tanagawa, a gold medalist that ends up failing Fishbone, unnotably. We get Hikakin being back on the show. Thank God, shockingly, no actual focus on him, which was strange. But again, he ends up failing Twin Diamond. We get the appearance of the TT brothers, this comedy duo that just points out T's because people find that funny, I guess. And what do you know? They suck. Not even going to bother telling you where they end up finishing. Then we get a guy from Buddies, which is something I definitely know. We only see his run from Twin Diamond on, where we start with him only having 35 seconds left on the clock. Again, he was pretty screwed from that point anyway. Then we get to the Sasuke Trials qualifiers, the first of which being Takumi Uemura, a guy dressed up as Superman for some reason, not explain why. But he ends up shockingly having another really clean run here, again clearing with 12 seconds on the clock, and he seemed very emotional afterwards. Yeah, at least he seemed to genuinely care in this moment, not just be this joke competitor here. And volume, again, we do get a fast forward of the rest of the trials people, where we get a clear from Yasuhiro Emoto, who probably gets the quietest edit of the stage 1 clears on this tournament. And that's followed by the top 2 qualifiers, both failing the Dragon Glider. I guess the people that set up the trials know what to work on next time. But anyway, then we get to the Sasuke Koshin winning team, them all being shown in a row here. The first one being Yukinari Suzuki, who ends up having a pretty clean run for the majority of it, getting the tackle with 45 seconds on the clock, that then proceeds to really slow down, with him only getting 13 seconds by the time the wall, where the timer even goes off before he even gets his first attempt in which he ends up failing his first attempt, only to get his second, but timing out in the process, which we do see him being devastated at. And again, I did really feel for a guy. Again, he did come extremely close, probably the closest, I believe, of those that didn't make it on the stage 2. But again, following that, we just fast forward his comrades, who end up failing relatively early on anyway. But then we get the appearance of Wasabi, who obviously last term had a very impressive performance, again, making it all the way to cliffhanger. Again, one of the best performances by a celebrity. And again, could he do it again? The answer is no, he can't. He fails the warp wall. Really, just his entire run was kind of sloppy. Again, he barely grabs a screwdriver. He has a bad jump on Twin Diamond. Though, again, he ends up missing his first 2 wall attempts, ends up timing out there, which, again, bit of a lackluster run from him. The to be fair, of the bigger celebrities in modern Sasuke, he actually has one of the better runs of them, considering a lot of them do end up failing the Dragon Glider. Or then we then get to Hayate Kajihara, where there wasn't much doubt. Again, obviously Kajihara was going to clear. It was just a matter of like by how much. And he ends up, again, demolishing the course. Fastest time of the night, once again, 44 seconds. Again, pretty expected. Then we get a series of women running the course, starting off with a lot of focus on Reina, a 90s pop star, I guess. Which, I mean, considering she's in her 40s, looks pretty good. but she fails screwdriver, so whatever. Then we get a actually kind of humorous fail from Ayumu Saito, a pentathlon champion who gets the fishbone, only to fail at the tail end of it, but continuing to hold on to the pillar where she has a very funny flail into the water. Then we get to Mai Watanabe, who we had seen on Sasuke World Cup, and I did have like some hopes for Mai Watanabe, though she ends up just failing Twin Diamond, which is a bit underwhelming. And then finally we get the reappearance of Yuka Mizuno, who's back on Sasuke after years at this point, to where obviously again she was brought back for World Cup, and she's going to later be in Kunoichi. But again, happy to see her back on Sasuke, but again, doesn't particularly go great. Again, last time World Cup, she made the Twin Diamond. This time, she doesn't even make it there. She fails Fishbone. In a spot where she just seemed to trip on the step, which I feel like we rarely see people fail that way on Fishbone nowadays. But then we finally get to the return of Kaio Nagano, the 15-year-old son of Makoto Nagano, which again, surreal seeing him now being this big and actually being a competent competitor. And again, he just has a pretty clean run, clears with 15 seconds left on the clock. All while throughout this entire run, we do have a lot of shots of Nakashima watching his run, with again, feeling like the show very much setting them up obviously as this like next generation of Sasuke. And again, I think it's very fitting, considering obviously Kaio is literally the son of Nagano, and Nakashima is the protege of Yamada, which again, I think is a cool dynamic there. And again, we then cut to Nakashima, who has a very impressive run here. Again, obviously last time, almost cleared stage 2, and this time again, very clean run, makes it back to stage 2. Not really much to point out from the run outside of, again, he did kind of barely get through Fishbone, but again, overall, pretty solid run. And immediately following that, we then end up fast forwarding through the run of Hayato Takasuka, who had previously made the stage 2 in the past, though last time did have a very shocking fail at Rolling Hill, though this time he ends up making it back to stage 2, though again, he's another one of these that ends up being severely under-edited on this tournament, despite the fact that he makes it all the way to stage 3. And then we get to Boltman, which was actually a really fun presence here, where he was, again, essentially just this guy dressed up as a tokusatsu character, and he actually ended up surprisingly doing very well in the course. It was very fast, and we get these like really shocked faces in the audience, to where while the back portion of his run was a bit slower and he only gets to tackle with 30 seconds left, he actually had a genuine shot of clearing the course, though ends up failing his 2 wall attempts, ends up timing out. But again, I thought this was a really riveting run. I would have loved if he cleared here. Again, this would have felt like the next coming of like Ragivaru Anastase, of again this out of nowhere person who blitzes through the course. So again, didn't end up being that way, but again, I would love to see Boltman return. But then we start to get some, again, more notable competitors. We get the return of Rine Sugeta, who wants to avenge his Silk Slider fail in the last tournament. And what do you know? He ends up clearing, though again, a little bit slower of a run, only 2 seconds left by the time he clears. But again, we do see him being very emotional. Again, love to see it from these celebrities that probably have better things going on in their lives. But then we get to the return of Daisuke Matsuda for some reason. Why'd he come back? Where obviously, again, he retired 2 tournaments ago. His run goes better than it did last time, where he failed Fishbone, though sadly he ends up just failing Twin Diamond, with him just not being quick enough there, which again, just kind of an underwhelming run for his return in this spot. But then we end up fast forwarding through a couple clears, the typical suspects of, again, Suzuki, who clears with 6 seconds, Tomohiro Muto, who clears with 18 seconds, again, just kind of expected. But then we get to Masashi Hioki, where they're never going to skip him, even though I wish they did, because there's nothing particularly notable about his runs, considering, again, they're typically just pretty clean, and he almost always gets to stage 3, and then almost always fails relatively on stage 3, to where, again, I like Hioki, but I do wish we just got to see other people's runs over his. Like, if we're going to be cutting runs, I would rather them cut Hioki's runs personally, but again, I get that he is like one of the more popular Sasuke competitors, so again, they're not going to, but for me, I kind of wish they did. But either way, he clears. Who would have guessed it? But to be fair, again, he does actually end up failing his first wall attempt, which did add some suspense there, but again, he ends up clearing anyway. But then we get to some celebrities and what is clearly the next day, though the show doesn't feel like it wants you to know that. Where again, like when Hioki was running, it was clearly about to get to sunset, and then we get to the next run where it's just as bright as possible. But then we get some more bigger names once again. We get Shuzo Uchimiya, who again is this person who has this like massive course and also had cleared stage 1 in the last tournament. And again, he clears it once again here, having again a pretty clean run throughout all of it. Oh, and then fast forward through a few runs. Some runs I would have liked to see, especially over Hioki's. But either way, we get Ryomatachi's run, where no setup, and also no clear music playing, where I did get very worried that we were about to get a fill montage, yet he just ends up clearing with 10 seconds on the clock. Again, just felt very weirdly edited there. And then we cut to Kano, where, again, I had a lot of hopes for Kano here. Again, he finally get past the Dragon Glider last time he competed. This felt like his chance to finally make it to stage 2, and he does. He finally clears stage 1 for first time since Sasuke 31, which is insane. It's been that long. The problem is that they completely fast forwarded through his run, which was so underwhelming. Again, I would have loved for them to have this big edit here for Kano, and it's but where again, Do you feel like this would have been a lot more interesting a TV to get Kano's first clear here in so many years over against some of these other runs that we end up getting? And especially considering like stage 1 was so long as well. Again, stage 1 took up like over 3 hours of the 5 hours of the show, where again, you couldn't find time to show Kano's run and all this. I feel like that was kind of egregious. But anyway, we then get to Shunsuke Nagasaki getting fast forwarded and him clearing once again, where again, it seems like he's consistently making to stage 2 again. So good for him. And again, none of those runs were worth showing, but instead we got to show Takahiro Hamada, a guy from West. And what do you know? He's super slow throughout the course, gets the Twin Diamond with only 15 seconds left, and then proceeds to fail Dragon Glider just as his time runs out. And that's also followed by Focus on Fuma, who failed Dragon Glider last time, and what do you know? He fails it in the exact same way once again. Why are we getting these runs? Like, I get they're celebrities, but I would have rather much seen Kano's run in this spot. But anyway, then we get to Jun Sato, where, again, this starts the typical murderer's row in the high 70s that we typically have in recent tournaments. And a lot of these, like, super top tier competitors that, again, typically make it to stage 3, just being put all in a row because Inui feels like this is an easy way to just montage all of them. But again, Jun has more of his run shown here, where we see him hopping through Fishbone as he typically does, and he proceeds to clear shockingly only 4 seconds on the clock, which was again very low for Jun Sato. But he ends up doing a nod to Olivia Vivian's backwards climb up the warp wall that she did in the World Cup, which again was a fun little moment there. Oh, then we then fast forward through the clears of Araki and Tada, as you would expect, only to stop down Ryusuke Ioka. Again, last time he had a really standout tournament. I mean, he was someone that I saw so much promise in the fact that, again, he in his first tournament made it all the way to vertical limit burst, then ends up tying last man standing with Yusuke Morimoto and Kitaru Yamamoto. Again, that was an insane run there, and again, doesn't disappoint here. And again, here he gets so much focus on as well. Again, he gets this big package to start off his run, where again, I felt like this was clear setup to him doing some big things down the road, where I was not ultimately shocked at the result that we ended up getting for him. But again, he ends up having a pretty clean run here, again, clearing with 18 seconds on the clock, really no complaints. And to further emphasize how important his run was, we then fast forward through Kitaru Yamamoto's clear immediately afterwards, which again made it very clear they stopped down at Miyamoto's run because it was clearly important to this overall tournament. But anyway, we then get the waste time on a run from a World Championship bronze medalist sprinter, I guess, who fails Fishbone. But then we get the return of Kenji Darvish, who obviously gets a pretty big segment. And again, we see his run from last time with him timing out at the warp wall, and he hasn't cleared stage 1 since Sasuke 36. So again, he really wants to clear here, and I did think we were set up to do so, only for him to shockingly fail the jump to the Dragon Glider, which was, again, so out of left field. Again, him just being another celebrity here that kind of just flops in the back portion of the course. Then we get to another medalist, a gold medalist in wrestling, Kenichiro Fumita, who they did end up focusing a bit on right before his run, again, showing him in seemingly a cocky manner, only for him to then fail Rolling Hill, which was kind of humorous. And that then cuts to the final runs from the women from this tournament, starting off with Natsumi Tsunoda, a judo gold medalist that had failed Fishbone before, and this time she gets revenge in clearing Fishbone, only to fail Twin Diamond. And then we obviously get the big names here, and again, Ayano, as you would expect, and also as you would expect, she fails stage 1, to where, again, I would have loved to see her back at stage 2. Obviously, she did clear it back at Sasuke 40, though, again, in Ayano fashion. Again, she ended up having a pretty slow run up until Twin Diamond, but then when we see her get to Twin Diamond, she really just ends up rushing the jump, and it's a spot where she was just nowhere close. I don't know what she was thinking jumping at the point that she did, but either way. We then follow that up with the run from Olivia Vivian, who gets fast-forwarded as she clears, which is underwhelming, as, again, Olivia Vivian is someone that obviously had a very exciting run back in World Cup, and now being on this real Sasuke course, and again, her being a woman that ends up clearing stage 1, again, you would think that they would want to emphasize that, but again, I guess not. But then we finally get to our last of the runs of people that I don't care about, in T. Okada, a baseball home run champion who ends up almost slipping off Rolling Hill, only to then fail to dismount anyway. And then we get Yuji Kaneko, a 2-time base stealing champion in baseball. I have no clue what that means. And who cares? He has terrible timing on Fishbone, fails there, whatever. But again, then we're getting to the heavy hitters. We get to Iwamoto, Snowman, who will surely clear this time. Where again, it is humorous at this point, just how much focus they put on him, despite the fact that he has been very inconsistent. Though, obviously, again, I get that he is probably the biggest celebrity on the board here. And he ends up having a pretty late jump on Screwdriver, barely makes it there. Ends up getting revenge on Twin Diamond, only for him to just fail Dragon Glider again. Because I guess we're back to that with Iwamoto. And then we cut to Takaru, who last time also failed Twin Diamond like Iwamoto. And what do you know? This time he clears it just to fail Dragon Glider like Iwamoto did. Again, I guess we're also doing that again. And it's funny that we get these two runs shown in full, only to then fast forward through Ilian Sharif, again, the representative from Ninja Warrior France, who ends up clearing alongside Daniel Gill, only to then stop down at Kane Kasugi, where, again, obviously Kane had missed out on Sasuke 41 due to an injury, though obviously last time we saw him in Sasuke 40, again, obviously he cleared there, again, continued his streak of never having failed stage 1, only for him to again, fail stage 1 in World Cup, which again, would you count that? Who knows? But again, coming into this tournament, he did technically have that streak still alive, and straight up, I did expect him to mess that streak up on this tournament. I actually did come into this expecting him to fail stage 1, but I did feel like his performance here was actually pretty strong. Again, having decent time coming into Dragon Glider, though, ends up shockingly failing at the end of the second railing, being the first ever stage 1 fail for Kane Kasugi, which I think him coming back for 40 and him now being involved in the Sasuke community is really cool, obviously. And again, I still think his stage 1 clear in Sasuke 40 is probably one of the best moments in Sasuke history for me. However, I think it just would have been cool if he just came back, showed that he could still do it, and then just never came back again, as that would, again, keep his legacy intact. But now, again, seeing him fail stage 1, and again, I'm sure we'll probably see him back down the road, and again, might fail stage 1 again, here and there, and again, just messy up his legacy again. It just kind of ends up being a bit underwhelming for someone that, again, in my mind was like such a big legend. And again, this is anything to disparage Kane Kasugi as a competitor, is obviously, again, him doing this in his 50s is insane. That he's still able to be someone that, again, you could even talk about as someone that could potentially make stage 3. But again, along with that, obviously will come a pretty spotty record. And I do think from a pure legacy perspective, I do kind of wish Kane was able to maintain the pretty perfect record that he had coming out of Sasuke 40. But anyway, then we get to the All-Stars. Again, we get the appearance of Shingo Yamamoto, who's now 50 years old somehow. Again, that's pretty insane. And I actually did think at a point that Shingo was going to clear. His run actually ends up being cleaner than Kane Kasugi's. He actually had more time at the start of the Dragon Glider, though ends up sadly failing the transition on the Dragon Glider, ending his run. And then we get the return of Bunpei Shiratori, which was really cool to see. I mean, I audibly gasped when seeing him in the trailer, where that was not on my bingo card to ever see Bunpei Shiratori back on Sasuke again, as, again, I thought he was done. I didn't think he had any interest in doing it again. But again, cool to see him back here. And again, he did better than I thought he would, in the sense that I actually thought he was going to fail Rolling Hill. Made it past that. Again, he failed Fishbone in a spot where, again, he had just had absolutely terrible timing. Anyway, we then get to Yamada, where, what do you expect? He does fail Twin Diamond. Again, I think that's kind of what you'd expect of him. Again, him just being kind of too slow to climb back up after the first jump. And again, pretty typical fail. But with that, we then get to Kawaguchi, which, again, why are we still giving Kawaguchi these high of numbers? I think it's insane. And again, at the end of the day, the numbers don't actually matter, obviously. But again, I think the fact that we're putting Kawaguchi on this high of a pedestal to give him numbers in the high 90s when he's just such an inconsistent competitor is kind of wild. But again, I get Inui loves him, but whatever. He clears. Cool. And then we get to Yoshiyuki's run with him having no hype here, where, again, I think that was a pretty bad sign for Yoshiyuki's performance in the tournament. The fact that it feels like no focus on him at all until his actual run, where right beforehand, we do see this very awkward moment between him and Daniel Gill, of Daniel Gill trying to hype him up and Daniel Gill telling him it's a good course, which is like, why are you telling him that? Anyway, Yoshiyuki clears, second fastest time of the night, 34 seconds. Good for him. And then we end with the champions as expected. Again, Nagano ends up competing, and again, kind of expected for Nagano. He fails Dragon Glider. Actually doing kind of decent enough in time to where, again, he would have had to really rush to the warp wall and get it on his first attempt, but he actually did have enough time to theoretically clear, but again, just fails the Dragon Glider anyway. And following that, we then end up fast forwarding through Yuji's run, as, again, he ends up clearing in a seemingly unnotable run there, and we obviously finish off stage 1 with Morimoto, where he just got married, I guess. Good for him. Kind of insane when looking back at the fact that I've been watching Sasuke ever since he was a kid as well. But either way, he ends up clearing, leaving us with 28 clears for this tournament. Again, one of the highest stage 1 clear rates in the history of the show, which, again, obviously is partially due to the pretty samey course that we are continuing continuously getting. But despite that, I actually don't really have many issues with that necessarily. I don't necessarily hate having all these clears. Obviously, I would prefer to have a different course, but I mean, again, I think having a wide number of clears isn't necessarily a bad thing. I do think a bad thing about stage 1 by the end of it here is really just the overall pacing of it. I feel like it was just too dragged out. I feel like it took up so much of the screen time of this tournament in a spot where stages 2 and 3 were just so much more interesting. Yeah, it feels like aspects of those stages were just completely rushed in a spot where stage 1 just went on for way too long, which again, I think that aspect of it does harm my opinion of the tournament, as again, I do think the tournament beyond this stage was actually pretty solid, but it is everything in stage 1 that just felt a bit meandering to me. But anyway, with that, we get to stage 2, which has no changes. I can't believe it. Though we do get some focus here on the foreigners being told the rules about the conveyor, how you can't touch the sides. So again, I wonder if that'll matter. Now, it actually matters for a non-foreigner, but again, I think this is a clear foreshadowing this, again, coming up, as we'll see. But again, we do start off with the run from Hiroki Kajita, who ends up really showing how dangerous the rolling log will be on this tournament, where right away he gets stuck on it, only getting it to slowly roll and ends up clearing it really just above 50 seconds left on the clock, to where, again, clearly not enough time for him to clear, and through that also ends up completely sapping out his strength for salmon ladder, to where he ends up failing there. We then get Koji Saikawa, who also has a pretty sloppy early run. We're in a spot where I thought Saikawa could have potentially made it to stage 3. And we do see him missing some rungs on the salmon ladder, though ends up recovering there, though again gets through it with only 50 seconds left on the clock, to where he really needs to rush, to which we end up proceeding to see him actually fail the spider walk, which was very strange to see. Again, I feel like we very rarely see people fail, especially the first portion of the spider walk in modern Sasuke, where again, that fail definitely came out of nowhere. But then we get to Takumi Uemura, Superman, who's not wearing the Superman outfit anymore, and I kind of forgot he was Superman until after his fail, but he ends up also getting stuck on the rolling log and ends up failing there as well. Then we get a fast forward of Yasuhito Emoto, that trials member that made it through, to which we cut to him being on the conveyor and getting DQ'd for touching the sides of the conveyor. I can't believe that became relevant, though I will say the way that it became relevant was a bit weird. That was in a fast forward, but whatever. We then finally get our first clear of the night with Kajihara, again, going as expected, going extremely fast on the rolling log, and then skipping the spider drop and clearing with 25 seconds on the clock. Again, a very fast time. Only to then get focus on the fact that it's now pouring outside, which this ends up being the point where I think stage 2 actually becomes genuinely fun, in that, again, I know people will criticize, oh, the rain sucks, again, it's unfair to the competitors, and yeah, it is, but it also makes it more fun to see people have to combat the rain, though I will say the rain did feel a bit insane here in the fact that they had to really cover the entire course in towels, and you could just really see the rain pouring down in front of them. But again, we do end up seeing Kaio be the first one to take the course on after it starts pouring, to which he ends up failing the end of the rolling log once again. Failing the rolling log for the second time in a row, and him clearly being pissed here, which again, you could argue he was screwed over by the rain, and that made it harder to grab onto the rolling log. But again, I did think this is a pretty interesting fail to see here, and but again, we then get to Nakashima, who also ends up slipping off the rolling log, though ends up saving it somehow, in a spot where he ends up kicking the towels out of the way as he does so, which was very funny. But we do end up seeing him wasting a lot of time at the back stream, to where I did get very worried that he was going to time out, where he only has 20 seconds after it, though he ends up really blazing through the conveyor, to where he ends up clearing with 2 seconds on the clock, in a spot where he now becomes the youngest person to ever clear stage 2. Again, a very impressive feat there. And following that, we finally get to some fast forwards, where I was shocked at how few fast forwards we end up getting up to this point, where considering we had such little runtime left, again, you would have assumed that there would have been more fast forwards here. I really actually expected them to fast forward a lot of stage 2. And again, while we eventually get there, we do end up seeing the majority of the early runs on stage 2. But again, we end up fast forwarding through the other Black Tiger and Hayato Takasuka, who ends up clearing here as well, again, being his first appearance in stage 3. We fast forward through Renee Sageta, who ends up timing out at the back stream, which was, again, kind of a lackluster ending to his run here. We fast forward through Suzuki, who ends up timing out, and fast forward through Muto, who ends up clearing, with, again, Muto now becoming one of the most consistent competitors in modern Sasuke and having almost nothing to show for that, because they just never show him on the show. But again, we obviously have to stop down to show Hyoki's run, because Hyoki's such a riveting competitor. Really boring run. He clears. Who would have guessed that? And that leads to us, again, fast forwarding through Shuzo's run in a spot where he clears with only 0.4 seconds on the clock, which, again, I would much rather watch that run than Hyoki's, but either way. And we follow that up with us seeing the full run from Ryo Matachi, which was probably not a good sign for Ryo Matachi, especially considering we see it actually pouring even more at this point. And again, he ends up failing the rolling log. continuing his kind of slump in stage 2. But then we get to fast forwarding through Kano, which was kind of lame. Again, them just fast forwarding through Kano's entire rebound season here. But again, he ends up timing out the conveyor. Again, we fast forward through Shunsuke failing the rolling log, which is a bit surprising, because I don't believe he's failed it in the past. But also even more shocking, we fast forward through Jun Sato failing the rolling log, which this ends his really insane streak, where again, he's had 9 straight stage 3 appearances, and for him to end that on a rolling log fail was pretty insane. But either way, then we get to see the full run of Naoyuki Araki, which he ends up clearing. And through that, I question, why did we see the full run of Araki? And again, I'm happy Araki is someone that has been, again, thrown to the side in the past. Again, I'm happy he's finally getting shown the show, but I also question, like, why Araki of all people? Or again, I feel like, again, even like Shuzo's run was one that was a lot more interesting to watch. And again, considering Araki doesn't even have like a major impact on the tournament by the end of it, I'm just like very confused of why they bothered to show Araki here. But really following that, despite the fact that we still have 10 more people to run stage 2, we didn't end up fast forwarding through all but one of the following runs, which I found really funny. And again, should have made it very clear that we're not getting a Kanzen here, where again, we fast forward through Tada's clear, we fast forward through Miyaoka's clear, which was probably the most telling one, where again, I think to me that very much screamed out that, okay, if he's not going to Kanzen after that really strong content early on, then again, it's probably hopeless on this season of a Kanzen. We also get Kitaro Yamamoto clearing. Fast forward, only to get the final full run of stage 2 of Olivia Vivian, who fails the rolling log in a really interesting way, actually. And the fact that she lands on the platform backwards and her hair ends up hitting the water, which I can't remember last time someone's hair ends up hitting the water while their body doesn't. But again, I assume that would have been enough to eliminate her. But again, she ends up sliding off the platform either way. And again, kind of being a little bit of underwhelming end to her run here. But again, following that, we fast forward through the rest of the clears. Again, Ilian Sharif clearing, Daniel Gill clearing, Kawaguchi clearing, which was shocking to me. They skipped Kawaguchi. Again, Yoshiyuki clearing, Arushihara clearing, and again, Morimoto, as you would expect. But with that, we actually do break the record once again for most stage 3 appearances here with 16. Again, despite the fact that actually stage 2 is, again, very fun to me. Again, I actually felt like all these fails that were happening very early on in the course were, again, really interesting to watch. And again, made a spot where, again, because we got so many clears, it should have been really boring because of that. And instead, again, it ended up still being a pretty fun ride. But with that, again, we then get to stage 3, where, again, I was fully not expecting anyone to clear stage 3. Again, stage 3 was in a spot where, again, we get so much focus on a vertical limit burst and talk about how no one has ever cleared it. And considering, again, the very short amount of time we had left, I did not think they would be able to get through everybody and have a final stage appearance. Though, again, I guess I was wrong. But with that, we do also get a modification to stage 3 here. A pretty fun one to me, and that being a modification to the swing edge. In that, beforehand, each of the 3 ledges that you grab onto are in the shape of an X, but now they transition the middle one to be in the shape of a Y, essentially meaning the middle transfer has you grabbing onto only 1 ledge instead of 2. Again, something that, again, seems very minor. And again, as I mentioned before, again, this is like these minor modifications that Nui is able to do without spending too much of the budget, and it's something that I do think ends up being very effective here. I think this is, again, a modification that made stage 3 actually really fun here, and us having some very shocking fails relatively early on in stage 3. But again, the new transfer here being seemingly difficult at the beginning, though to be fair, they end up kind of gaming it by the end. But either way, we do start off with the run from Kajihara, who, again, ends up failing the new transfer here. Again, being shocking to see a fail Kajihara this early in a spot where, again, I was expecting him to get the vertical limit burst. He's been someone that's been failing the cliffhanger recently. I feel like he was probably in a spot where I assumed he's trained enough on it to where he could probably clear it, but he doesn't even get there. He fails the swing edge. And again, I think that instantly showed how fun this new modification could be, especially as we then cut to Kitaro Yamamoto's reaction, who had just failed an easier version of the swing edge back in the World Cup, where again, I thought that was a funny little moment as well. But either way, we then get to Yuta Nakashima, who seemed to already be struggling by the time the swing edge, though ends up shockingly actually clearing it, being the first to clear a modified swing edge, only to then fail the second transition on the cliffhanger, which is, again, kind of expected. Though, again, his timing was pretty terrible there. Him jumping when he was just way too high. But again, still being a very satisfying conclusion to Nakashima's run with him. Again, obviously being someone I'm expecting to get much better down the road. But then we fast forward through, again, Hayato Takasuka's run. Again, all of his runs were digested here and him failing the Y on the swing edge. But that's when we get to see a run from Tomohiro Muto somehow. Muto's actually on the show. It's a miracle. Though this does start the trend here of starting everyone's run from the swing edge, which again, the majority of the runs that we see from this point forward end up starting from the swing edge, which again, I also think is really funny, calling back to the editing of stage 1. The fact that I think even Inui at this point knows, again, flying bar into Sidewinder is kind of just a boring stretch of obstacles to watch. So it's again, just start off on the swing edge. I think you're good. And we do see Muto clearing it here in a spot where I was pretty shocked to see him clear it, only to then just fail the first transfer on the cliffhanger anyway, which again, he wasn't particularly close. But then we get to Hioki with a lot of focus on how he's training on the cliffhanger, because that's something he's obviously never done and definitely would actually cause a difference this time. So again, he's obviously going to clear the cliffhanger if he got there, but instead he just fails the Y on the swing edge. Again, that's it for Hioki. And it does lead to us fast forwarding through Shuzo's run, where I was pretty disappointed to see him end up failing the Sidewinder drop, to where, I mean, to be fair, he does come very close to surviving it, but it's still a spot where, again, considering how many obstacles he's trained on, I would have expected him to do better than that. But then we do get to seeing another run from Araki, which was so weird to see Araki on the show. But again, another one, we got a lot of focus on him training for the cliffhanger, and he actually ends up clearing the swing edge here, only for him to still struggle on the cliffhanger, him even struggling before even making the second transfer, to where obviously he ends up failing that there. Kind of just being a weird end to Araki's run on the season. But then we get to Tetsuya Tada's run, with again focus on how he failed the vertical limit burst last time, and now he's training on it. And again, we start off with seeing him on the swing edge, to where he ends up making the transfer to the Y, but weirdly by grabbing the sides of it, which I'm shocked is allowed, where this very much feels like a technicality that I feel like Inui seems like the type of person that he would be very stingent on. No, you can't do this. Yeah, somehow, again, they were allowed to just grab the edge, which kind of ruins the point of the obstacle. I would not be shocked if they changed something about this for down the road, but either way, he clears the swing edge, clears the cliffhanger. We get the epic music as he clears the cliffhanger, only for him to just fail vertical limit again, though makes it further this time. Again, failing right before the final section, so again, good for Tada, I guess. But then we get to the big run that I was expecting to go pretty well here in the run of Miyaoka, who again has a very clean run through this course. Again, very easily clears swing edge and clears the cliffhanger in a spot where we do not get the epic music for the cliffhanger, which to me felt pretty apparent. I think he was set up to clear the burst. And again, he does so pretty cleanly. I mean, we see him struggle a bit on the final transition, but again, still clears the vertical limit burst, obviously getting the epic music there. And again, being this pretty great moment here. Again, Miyaoka really just came out of nowhere to be one of the top Sasuke competitors, doing something that, again, as we later see, no one else has been able to do in again, 2 tournaments and even the World Cup included. Now, I will say, because I still was in there the impression that we didn't have enough time for the final stage, I was actually expecting to fail the pipe slider immediately following this. I was worried that he was going to make a like Yuji and derail instantly, or fail the jump like Kitaro did in 40, but he actually instead has a pretty perfect technique on the pipe slider, doing it in a way that caused him to have like no backwards momentum when swinging to the platform, which again was very impressive to see. And again, he just ends up demolishing the stage 3, which again was all just such an impressive performance from Miyaoka there. But following that, again, we get to Kitaru Yamamoto's run, with again obviously the setup of him being worried about the swing edge, and he clears the swing edge Y, only to fail the final transfer, which was kind of underwhelming to see. Kind of weird that he failed there also, and the fact that, again, Kitaro's cleared the actual swing edge multiple times in the past, and he had that fail in World Cup, but again, I don't know why he's having these issues with swing edge at this point, but whatever. But this is followed up by us getting to finally see a run from Ilian Sharif, which was a bit strange here in the fact that they very much did hype up Ilian Sharif's run here in a spot where they didn't for Daniel Gill's. That made it very clear to me that Ilian was probably going to do better than Daniel Gill. And we do see him get to the swing edge, easily clearing that, gets to the cliffhanger, which again, he was not able to do back in World Championship as his team was eliminated by then. So again, it was kind of untested to potential there, and he does end up shockingly clearing it, which again, he is a rock climber, and through that, obviously, you would expect him to have the ability to do so. But again, we haven't seen a foreigner clear the cliffhanger dimension when working properly. So again, that was pretty impressive to see, though it ends up being a bit underwhelming when he just instantly fails on the burst in a spot where I think he just like underestimated the transfer. But still, again, a very impressive run from Ilian Sharif. That is then followed up by Daniel Gill doing the same. Though, to be fair, again, he had a pretty fun run in the fact that he has this like one-handed save on the swing edge, but and they end up really rushing through his run, the edit with Daniel Gill again being under-edited for the second tournament in a row. But again, he ends up failing the dimension once again, a spot where he just jumped way too early. Again, he just seems to have this issue of timing on the cliffhanger. But anyway, we then cut to Kawaguchi, with us seeing his run in full. we see him on the Flying Barn Sidewinder for some reason. Like, we definitely need to see that. What do you know? He feels swing edge. Cool. Then we get the Yoshiyuki's run where, again, I had no confidence in Yoshiyuki at this point. Again, his edit was very subdued, especially in comparison to his edit in 40, where obviously he has that breakout tournament there. This time, ends up failing swing edge. Why? I expected that. I think that's what kind of made sense in this spot, though. He does feel in an interesting way in the fact that he actually grabs it from the front and ends up breaking it in doing so, which I don't know if he was thinking that that's what the others were doing, or if it was just a genuine mistake, but in kind of an underwhelming way to see him go out there. Oh, and then cut to Arushihara, who finally gets his intro package and finally is on the show, and he ends up clearing swing edge, which is cool, and only to fail the cliffhanger once again, which again, I said this last time, it's a bit disappointing to see Yuji failing the cliffhanger in a spot where, again, obviously, like, for a while, he was considered the best at the cliffhanger, where he was someone that, especially, like, with the ability to train on a cliffhanger, where, again, outside of the crazy cliffhanger in Sasuke 28, he's never properly failed the cliffhanger until these last couple seasons, and for now, him just, like, naturally failing on the cliffhanger just feels like, again, a bit of a thing that kind of tarnishes his legacy in that light for me, even though obviously still the fact that Yuji's able to make it to stage 3 consistently at this age is still very impressive. But then we finally wrap it up with Morimoto, where again we get his full run here, with also showing him training on the burst, and straight up, I did not expect Morimoto to clear here. Where again, we literally just saw Morimoto a few months ago on World Cup, and him not seemingly made any progress on the vertical limit burst, to where I was not expecting it to go particularly well for him here, and it kind of goes exactly as I expected. I mean, with him once again failing the final transfer in a spot where he was actually doing pretty well up to that point, but again, that final transfer ends up taking him out once again. Again, showing Miyaoka passing an obstacle that Morimoto cleared, which I thought was a really cool precedent to set here. And the fact that, again, for a while now, it's really just been all about Morimoto, that Morimoto is the only person seemingly has this genuine chance at winning and has this chance at beating these like really insane obstacles in the back portion of stage 3. Yet now we finally have somebody in Miyaoka that can, again, do better than him, which I think sets up interesting precedent for future seasons, that we actually have a true contender. That is, if he could actually do the final stage. But then we cut to the final stage. It's the same final stage we've had in the last few tournaments. And again, Miyoka is the only person there, which again, I thought was a cool conclusion to this tournament. Again, this really massive breakout tournament for Miyaoka, feeling in line with like Yuji making it to the final stage in 22, which put him on the map. And again, Miyaoka here gets shown training for the final stage, doing salmon ladders and rope climb, but no rock climbing, which I feel like that was very worrying. And what do you know? He sucks at the rock climbing, taking him 15 seconds to do it, way slower than the likes of Yoshiyuki or Miyamoto back in Sasuke 40. And he also ends up being relatively slow on the salmon ladder as well, to where he ends up timing out just as he reaches the rope, which again, I'm fine this as an outcome to the tournament, him failing the final stage. I would say I did wish he did a bit better. I wish he at least got like, again, somewhat up the rope to make it seem like this is actually feasible for the next tournament, that Miyoka can actually potentially Kanzen next time. But I still feel like, again, this was a very solid conclusion to what ends up being a pretty solid tournament. And really just sum up my thoughts on the tournament. Again, I did think it was one that started off a bit rough. I just felt like stage 1 felt very monotonous, where again, while the inclusion of the screwdriver was really fun, it really was not enough to really break out the monotony, especially considering how dragged out stage 1 was. While there were some shocking fails here and there, again, did not come off as riveting to me, though it is really stages 2 and 3 that really end up excelling this season, in my opinion, with the rain having these shocking fails, because that, again, I thought was really interesting to see. And then stage 3, and with some of these shocking swing edge Y fails, and us having Miyaoka, again, have this really breakout performance, I did feel this ended up being a pretty solid tournament, in my opinion. Again, I think it's definitely better than 41. I don't know where it necessarily stands in my Sasuke tournament ranking. I would not say it's like in the upper echelon of tournaments, especially considering how lacking stage 1 was. But yeah, I do think it's a pretty solid tournament, but one that does have, again, a couple glaring issues within it. But either way, with that, those are my thoughts on Sasuke 42. Now, straight up, because I'm not doing reviews of A&W seasons anymore at this point, again, Sasuke reviews are pretty much it from the Ninja Warrior side of things on this channel. Now, again, I do plan on doing some A&W videos down the road of, again, a season ranking, a top 10 competitor video, but again, I'll say just in general, like, don't expect much Ninja Warrior stuff for probably the next year outside that. But again, despite the fact that I gave up on A&W reviews, I will never give up on Sasuke reviews. Again, these are short enough for me to put together, along with them, again, being in a good time slot, along with me also having, again, a deep attachment to Sasuke, to where, again, I don't think I would ever give up on doing these reviews, to where, again, I will always do these reviews once a year. So stay tuned for those. Now, I do want to also mention the fact that we do know that there is a new Kunoichi tournament coming out in a spot where I did contemplate if I would cover it or not. I decided not to, just simply because I do think Kunoichi's probably not worth my time to do a formal video about. But again, don't expect like a formal video on it on this channel. But again, if you do want to hear me talk about it, because I will watch it, you can follow me at Twitch at twitch.tv/TheBurning Review, where again, I'll definitely talk about my reaction to it. So that's something. But yeah, that's the video. That's all my thoughts on Sasuke 42. Thank you for watching.